Okay, again, hello everyone. Welcome to our latest webinar. My name is Ron Bro, and I'm happy to be able to present the topic today for resource management model comparisons. So for today, we're going to talk about a few items. One of them around resource management approaches. We'll talk about how OpenAir can support those different models and some of the pros and cons of the different features of OpenAir, and a few other features you may not be aware of, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. So every customer we work with, we end up having a very detailed discussion around their definition of resource management. And everyone has slightly different definition or goals of resource management. But the one thing we tell our customers is resource management is not a tool, it is a process. And you have to have a well-defined process and tools to support that process for you to have success with resource management. And generally, there's two different types of resource management models that we see. One being a centralized model, the other being a decentralized model. And so generally every customer falls into one of those two categories. And so as you're looking at your organization, trying to determine what is the best model for you, there's a few questions that you're going to want to ask yourself. Let's go into those, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between the two models. So as you're evaluating yourself to say, where are we in the resource management spectrum? What issues are you having? What challenges are you trying to resolve? Are you having an issue with people constantly being overscheduled, or potentially people being underscheduled? Do you have good visibility in your demand for resources and your capacity? Are you having project issues as related to resource management? Any delays that are being caused? The answer to some of these questions will kind of help structure, how do you accommodate a well thought out resource management methodology? It also will depend heavily on how your organization is structured. So are you matrix? Do you have people from various teams, departments assigned to cross-functional departments? Or in other words, are people sharing people across different groups? Or are you siloed? Are people pretty much working with a single team, and that's their limitation to that group or department? Or potentially, are you geographically or regionally based? And are your resource pools based the same? Ultimately, a lot of your organizational structure will also determine whether a central or decentralized model is best. Lastly, ask yourself, who's responsible for resource staffing? Because that's a big question that needs to be answered. Are project managers able to pick the resources they want on their projects? Or is there resource folks that are determining which resources should go to what projects, what customers? So those are questions that you need to ask. And a lot of it also bases on, do you have the infrastructure to support some of these structures? So let's talk about a centralized model. We see this as probably the most common model. It basically means that there is a defined process around requesting and being allocated resources based on the pool of resource. So generally there is a project, there are project requirements for resources, and then there's an individual or a team of managers who are responsible for providing those resources to the project teams for creating that staffing model. It does require an additional administration, because you have to have, the request and the scheduling process is part of that process. The resource management team is not necessarily involved in the day-to-day of all the projects. So they're more so not so concerned as to the state of the project or where the project is. They're more so concerned as what is the resource requirements for the future of the projects. And they are also responsible for managing usage. So they're responsible for making sure we're not overstaffed, understaffed, as well as where there are conflicts that will occur. Their team is managing those conflicts. As opposed to a decentralized staffing model, generally we see this in smaller organizations, but not necessarily. But basically where the folks responsible for the projects are also responsible for building out the project teams. So a lot of times we see where the project managers are responsible for their own project staffing. And so, project manager gets a project, they now have to go find staff available to them, and they're going and booking resources directly. There's no request and fulfillment of the resourcing. It does create it has the potential to create a lot of conflict where multiple project managers trying to use the same resources. So there does need to be some sort of a weekly conflict approach to removing the conflicts and making sure that each project manager gets what they need. And usually that's the managers are working to make sure their folks are not being double booked. And the benefit of it is, project managers know best what's going on in their project. So they can adjust their staffing plan, update their future needs much quicker than a resource manager would be able to, because they wouldn't have that direct knowledge. So again, benefits and cons to both approaches. OpenAir obviously is a very diverse tool that can support both approaches, and we'll talk about the different staffing tools in OpenAir that can, how they benefit. So we've kind of categorized these in different buckets. Obviously, the key module within OpenAir is the resource module. And the resource module is where you get the functionality that most customers are using for managing the resourcing. And then within the resource module, there are several different views and approaches and tools that you can turn on or off to support, whether it's a centralized model or a decentralized model. Then there's kind of a blended combination where you have task assignments and bookings. So it's using the project module as well as the resource module to kind of co-blend the requirements. And then, a lot of customers will use the project module as a standalone tool for managing both the project and the resource requirements. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of each of these items. The project module alone is probably, mostly for a decentralized approach. And the rest of these can support both decentralized as well as centralized, but we'll talk about that. So just create the tool of bookings in OpenAir. Obviously, you're most likely familiar with the different ways to manage the bookings in the resources module. There's obviously the booking forms. You're directly booking a resource or a generic to a project for a duration of a period and a duration of time and hours. There's worksheet views. There's also, if you're not aware, in UI4, you can now there's a booking worksheet within the project center. And so this is a really nice blending of the project view of tasks and requirements, as well as with the ability to create and manage bookings. So I've become a fan of the booking worksheet within the project center. And if you don't have that available to you today, you should probably contact support or Top Step. We can point you in the right direction. All of these can be used in either manner. They can be used in a central or a decentral model. And booking types can support this. So using booking types, there's a lot of different use cases for how booking types are used. In a decentralized model, you could use booking types where we have a booking type of requested. And so a project manager creates requested bookings. And then once they're using form permissions and some other features of OpenAir, you can then have them restricted to where that once it becomes confirmed, they can't alter any of the details other than maybe changing it back to requested for changes. And so booking types, there's a lot of built-in functionality in addition to just being able to categorize booking types. You can also use those also to trigger alerts. So as you are confirming new resources, having those booking types trigger emails to the managers or the individual users is also another workflow opportunity for booking types. So setting up your booking types could support a lot of different models, OpenAir resource models. So we need to think thoroughly on how we're going to use those. The other thing about just creating a booking is as soon as you hit save, that booking is immediately visible in reports. That resource is immediately reserved. So there's no delay. As folks are looking for available resources, your resources becomes immediately unavailable. So obviously just creating bookings in the resource module, you have that immediacy of the booking. You have the notification available using the booking types. It can support task assignments and timesheet access. So in OpenAir, under the project settings, you can determine how if a booking impacts a task assignment. And so a lot of customers will say, they have to be booked to the project in order to be assigned. And this really supports a decentralized model where you are requesting resources. The resources are then booked to the project, and then the project manager goes in and now has the ability to book those resources or assign those booked resources to their tasks. So that's a out-of-the-box feature that really kind of allows you to enforce the behavior in that model where there is a resource manager and project manager working together. There could be workflow required in a centralized model that you need to set up. We talked about potentially using booking types, and obviously, bookings are a constantly moving target. So having the bookings constantly being viewed, updated, is a requirement of any good resource plan. This is more of a decentralized model where you have the concept of a booking request. So this is an older feature. It's been around OpenAir forever. We really don't recommend it very often when we're talking to customers, as there are some limitations. But basically, the idea was being able to have a formal request and then a formal approval and fulfillment of that request. And you cannot, it's out of the box, can be enabled in the resourcing module, resource settings. And you can also limit booking requests to only be able to request generics. That's another setting. So as an example, a lot of customers say a PM can go and request the types of resources they need, but not necessarily named resources. And so the booking request would support that. You also have the automated workflow. You have the alerts as requests are created. They're almost like, think of a timesheet. They can trigger alerts to the requesters as well as to the approvers. The downside of this feature is they do not show as booked until it's been approved. So while it's sitting in open or sitting waiting for someone to take action, if there is a named resource in that request, they show as available up until the point they're approved. So that is something to think about if you're using this feature. So again, we've kind of highlighted this automated workflow. You can focus on generics, does support booking types. The major con, no visibility of anything in flight. Booking approvals came around much later, and really it was an attempt to solve the limitation of the out-of-the-box booking requests. And so booking approvals basically act similar to a timesheet process, but it's for requesting resources. So again, supports a central model where a project manager or project operations is requesting. Bookings can be approved, they can be rejected. You can request a resource or generic. There's automated workflow and messaging that happens. Approval routing can be set at a project level. And so you kind of have, again, very similar to time and expense and invoicing processes in OpenAir. But as soon as you request, create the booking for a resource, they become visible in the process. So it shows that they have been requested in a different state of the request throughout the process. So as folks are evaluating available folks, they can see where they are in the process and whether they truly are available or not. So we talked about some of the pros and cons. All of these models, all these features support, the whole task assignment, timesheet access that we talked about earlier. One of the cons to be aware of is, the creation does not force approval workflow, meaning they can get stuck in different parts where, just like a timesheet gets submitted or rejected, no one takes further action. They could kind of get stuck in limbo. And the good news is they're showing as available, so somebody's going to have to take action. But they do have the potential to get stuck in the process, and someone needs to be monitoring those types of events to make sure they're pushed to the next level. You also want to align your booking types with your booking approval. So it does somewhat dictate a little bit about how you use booking types. For example, if you have tentative and confirmed bookings or hard or soft bookings, how does that work with a approved booking? So you want to kind of think through your booking type usage and what that looks like from a booking approval process. Booking Planner, another recent feature in OpenAir, really meant to solve the one question or challenge that everyone's been asking for. It's drag and drop and inline editing inside of OpenAir, and Booking Planner gives you that. Gives you the ability to visually, you can create bookings, you can manage bookings, you can bulk edit bookings in the Booking Planner. And so it's very useful way to manipulate, create, and update your bookings. Again, you do have the drag and drop where you can drag bookings to move it to different dates, or extend bookings by extending by clicking. You can also inline editing with the dates as well. So a lot of quick ways to edit the data and be able to see the impact of that data. So big fan of the Booking Planner. You can also look at the Booking Planner, which really nice, is not just by resource, but you can look at it by project and customer. And so think of a Gantt chart for resourcing. And that's really what the Booking Planner becomes, and be able to see how are my resources aligned with my project, and do I have the right dates, right level of effort to support the project. We talked about some of the pros, the drag and drop interactive view. Again, you can move things around and see kind of what if analysis. This is another feature that OpenAir folks like myself have been asking for forever. It kind of gets you a little bit there, where you can start to drag and drop or extend and see what the impact of that is. And if it all works out, you can hit save. If you want to abandon, you can just cancel out of it. So that's, that can be handy as well. I'll say for big projects and lots of resources spread out over long periods of time, the view can be a little challenging. You might require some paging and scrolling in there, but if you use filters and are defined in your time periods, that can help benefit that. The resource demand request. So we probably don't see this one as often because it really kind of is a very heavy feature. And what I mean by heavy feature is it's a very powerful feature, but in my opinion, it's got a very specific use case. And we've implemented this for a handful of customers because they really had a need that this filled. It's also a very process um, driven feature. So what it really does is allow you to create resource queues of needs and then have the resource teams fulfill those queues through the search process. It also requires you to have and manage skill profiles in the system because it really focuses on availability based on skill profile elements in the system. It is really designed for a central model. An example of where I've seen this really powerful, I had a customer that implemented computer systems in large office buildings. And for go lives, they would have 20 folks needed over a weekend to sit at the terminals and be there to support the go live. All the folks had the same skill set. It was more of a volume based type of request. So this is where the resource demand request, if you didn't use it, you would need 20 bookings of the same person, the same type of person, but it can get a little messy trying to figure out, is this new person? Is it the same person, et cetera. Whereas the resource demand request feature can allow you to create those 20 queues of what you need. And then as you're searching and fulfilling each queue, you're swapping generics for named users. You can see how many of the queues you've filled, how many are still needed. And so it gives you much better clarity on the number of folks that you need versus the number of folks that have been already provided. So again, very heavy feature, but a very powerful feature if you have the right need for it. And so it's something to be thought through if it's something you're considering. It is a project team plan. It's basically a project plan for resourcing. And again, the types and the quantity of resources is a key element of this. And quantity really is important if I need a high quantity of resources. And it does use best matching. So that's really focused on the skill profile, which has to be managed. Again, this one also doesn't give you any kind of in-flight requests. So as you're managing folks and putting them in queues, you don't really see the impact of it until you're done and have confirmed them. So there is kind of a black hole in the scheduling using this feature. Task assignments and bookings. I mean, this has been the great debate for many OpenAir customers for years. Why, task assignments versus bookings, when to use one versus the other, or how to use them together in tandem. OpenAir did put in, there is a feature to be able to take a project task structure with resources, generic resources, and be able to use that to generate bookings. It does require the approval process we talked about earlier, the booking approvals. So that, a lot of customers like that approach where they go in, set their project plan up, and then they use that to auto create the initial set of bookings, which would then get submitted to the centralized resource team. And then they would go to start taking action and assigning resources. You could also, a lot of customers will just manually, create the bookings, as we mentioned earlier. Once the bookings are named resources are created, they can come back in and then update their tasks based on those booked resources. And so we talked a little bit about that. That can be both a central and a decentral model. TopStep's also built some customizations in OpenAir to manage this process where not only is the task assignments auto create the bookings, but changes in the task assignments could update the bookings or vice versa through scripting. So if you're looking for some sort of more automated process than you have today, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you to see if what we've done for other customers could be beneficial. to you. Also, I mentioned it earlier, but I want to mention it again. The Project Center in the recent release, they allowed you to basically pull in the worksheet from the resource module into the Project Center. And so that's a really powerful way and it's how I pretty much book my resources. I go into the Project Center, I go into the projects, and then I add my generics and week over week, or put in my bookings, and then I manage those as projects change dates and update those with named resources as projects go live. So a way to basically, even though you're using the power of the resource module, but you're doing it within the project. And it's a good central. It does support more of a decentral model, but also as a central model, it can be very beneficial as well. Again, using the project plan to create the initial, it may also require some custom fields. So if you're assigning multiple folks to tasks, they may have different start and end dates. So we've done that as well as part of the scripting customization we've done for other customers. And really gives the project manager kind of that initial control of their initial plan. Resource manager then is taking on those requests and fulfilling them, and having the PM get those alerts as folks are added to their project, so they can go and assign them the tasks. They are still, if you are, either doing it manually or through the standard feature or even through the scripting, they are still separate records and are separate elements that need to be managed. Task assignments. So, when we first went live with OpenAir in my previous company, I didn't quite get the difference between task assignments and bookings. So we decided to focus on task assignments and put bookings off for another day. Well, obviously, task assignments, you can use task assignments to manage resource requirements. It is definitely a decentralized model for resource management. There are some major limitations, though. And there's actually, if you ask support, you can turn on an assignment chart, which is available in the project module, that looks similar to this booking chart, but not quite as pretty and not quite as customizable as the booking chart. But in theory, you could just manage your task assignments and look and layer that on top of projects off of projects and see requirements for resources. The pro there is you're managing your project plan, you're managing your resources all in one action. And it does have there is an interactive Gantt chart today in OpenAir that you can use that helps you do that. The con is, as we all know, is if you've got a task that starts in January and ends on March, and all the resources assigned to that task will all be scheduled equally throughout that date process. Now, you may be able to assign them different hours, but the time frame will stay the same. And in theory, in real life, that's not the case in most projects, where you may have folks starting one period and ending another, and other folks starting later in that task structure and then ending at a different date. And so to get the level of accuracy you need, you would then have to have multiple tasks, which could create very complex multiple plans. So it's not ideal from a resource management perspective, which is really why the bookings and the resource module is really the powerful way to be able to get the more accurate requirements. Booking the task, we find ourselves working with a lot of customers where this is really a good fit. And whereas generally you see this is where it is more of a decentralized model, where the project managers are really the ones that are in control of resourcing their own projects. And the benefit here is they can go out and actually, instead of just booking to a project, you can actually go book to a project and then a task. And really what that does is gives you the ability to, you no longer have to go back into the project and then assign to the task. So it kind of allows you to use that booking the task as the task assignment by allowing the end user to now be able to put time to the task. So if you've got a resource management approach to PM, resource management, then by having them book to a task, it's saving them a step of having to go back into their project. When you do book to a task in OpenAir, the booked users are available in the outline view. So similar to assigned users in the outline view, you can see booked users in the view. You can obviously see the booked hours down to the task level next to the planned hours and the actual hours. So you do get a nice view of all the important data lines in the project this way. And it does, though, require simpler project plans. If you get to a 50, 25 to 50 plus task structure, bookings to task no longer become really efficient, and because each booking requires a task, and each time someone's working on a task in a week or in a month, it requires a new booking. So that can be a big con. So it does require that you really kind of simplify your project structure for really around milestones or the minimum you can get away with to support both good project management, but as well as an efficient resource management. But we do see this quite a bit with customers, and it works really well. This is another feature I think a lot of folks don't know is available. You can probably look this up in Suite Answers if you want to find out more information. But we get a lot of questions around, I want to do a template and for bookings, similar to a template you might use for creating projects. And there's no really template for bookings, but what you can do is you can copy bookings from a project to another project. So in theory, you could potentially create a project and have bookings against that project, and then be able to come in and using the bulk editing, you can copy those to a new project and then update those. You can even update the dates through the process as well, update the resources as well. So it does give you a lot of flexibility to be able to, less key punches, more automation, which is what everybody wants. So if you're interested, again, I would check with Suite Answers to see. This does have to be enabled via support, but it can be really powerful if you have resource plans that mirror each other for the same types of projects. Then this might be an efficient way to create that initial set and be able to start processing that data without having to go in and manually create it. So that's the presentation for today. As you know, Top Steps strives to be the top PSA/OpenAir partner out there. So we appreciate everyone's time today. If any of these topics are interesting and would like to talk about them, please feel free to contact us. I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.